Okay, so we're now going to examine the fern. So here is an adult fern. I kept it in the aquarium because the aquarium then allows more moisture, keeps a humid environment. The fern, like the moss, then doesn't do as well in these classrooms without that extra humid environment. So these are fronds on the fern. Okay. Underneath the fronds then we have little structures, and so we can see these little teeny tiny structures. These then are the sori. Sori then have sporangia, and the sporangia have spores. So this fern is the sporophyte. The gametophyte then was a little teeny tiny itsy bitsy thing way down at the base that started this whole fern. Okay. The gametophyte, then we had our male gametophyte make sperm, like you saw in lab. Flagellated sperm swim over to the eggs, then in a hermaphroditic gametophyte. Those eggs, then the sporophyte grows out of those eggs, and this big giant thing grew out of that little itty bitsy gametophyte. Okay, similar to the ones that you guys looked at in lab. Now this is diploid. All right, if I pull on this, you can see it lifts up. So that means that it has structures that are growing down, so it has nice roots growing down below down here, right, that are basically going to be vascular tissue that allow the movement of water, allow this then to occupy more arid habitats where it can then grow its roots down and suck up all that water, all right? And then since this is a sporophyte, it's going to make spores. And so underneath here, then we have our sori with sporangia. Those sporangia then are going to make spores. And I'll focus in up here tighter on it so you can then look at those. And then what we're going to do is scrape off the sporangia and look at those spores. But before we scrape them off, we'll actually just take a leaf off here, and or a piece of this frond off, and we will look at these directly underneath the dissecting microscope. Okay, so here we can see all of these sporangia actually launching, which is really pretty cool. Get in a little bit closer. You see that elater there open up, and then it will launch the spores out. We can see a lot of them doing it right now. Where basically the light from the microscope dry out those elaters. The elaters back up, straighten out, and then inside those little sacs are all the spores getting launched everywhere. And they're just continuing. This is awesome. Let's even go closer here. See if we can get a really big close-up. There we go. And you can see all those spores inside that sporangium there as it goes. And it releases them. Super nice. On the bottom there. Oops, my bad. Quite impressive. Okay. There you can see all of those sporangia in there. So these are all the sporangia on the underside of the fronds then. The frond itself is diploid. We go through meiosis, so the outside of the sporangium is diploid. Then we go through meiosis to produce the spores inside. The spores that are being launched out are the haploid spores. Okay. And that's good. Okay, so now I'm going to make a wet mount from this, so we will first take a little drop, put a little teeny tiny drop of water on there. And we'll just touch it to it. Okay. We'll just go in here, grab this guy's, scrape these guys off here, and put these scraped guys off. We'll spread them around in that water. Okay, all those little guys then are the sporangia that we just looked at that all exploded. And we will check this out underneath the compound scope. Okay, so here we go. We can see all these guys that we just looked at. So tons of spores in there when you look at the sizes of those spores. Do you see two different sizes of spores, or are all those spores a single size? And we can see a sporangium intact right here before it's actually launched its spores, and we can see that sac. You see the elater attached around the outside, and we can see that sac that's filled with spores, and then in the background we can see all those spores that have launched out. Okay, and then there are probably several elaters in here, or several sporangia, I would imagine, that have already launched. And we can kind of look at those, look at the sacs, look at the elaters. So we'll look at this little group here. Alright, so again we can see all those spores. There we can see that elater that has already launched its spore, and we have the remnants of that sporangium at the edge of that elater there. So that's cool. Background then we can see all those spores, right? Similar to the spores that you inoculated when you looked at your ferns. And we can definitely see, do we see big spores and little spores, or all those spores exactly the same size? Alright. We'll do one last look here, see if there's anything else that's cool. And then, alright, so those are our sporangia, that's our wet mount, and spores.